Hey everybody, this is Craig Garber. Welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar, and we're going to show some love to the rhythm section today with Glenn Worf. He's an incredibly talented and very successful session player, bass player, really good guy. He's had a hell of a career. I want to thank a couple of quick messages. One, I want to just thank our mutual friend, Nir Z, for connecting us. Thank you, Nir. And also make sure you go to everyonelovesguitar.com/subscribe to subscribe to the audio and the video of the show. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and that little emoji that looks like a bell. That helps us out a lot with the recommendations on YouTube. And thank you. All righty, tell you about Glenn. Born in Dayton, Ohio, moved around several different states because his dad was in the Air Force. He eventually settled in Madison, Wisconsin, which he regards as his hometown. In the late 60s and early 70s, I mean, this guy looks 35, but believe it or not, he was actually around. There was a great music scene up in Madison, and being near the University of Wisconsin, Chicago gave Glenn tons of exposure to endless types of live shows and musical genres, which he soaked up. He started his Nashville career as a touring bassist, but within a couple of years, he quit traveling to concentrate on studio work. There were very challenging years early on, but eventually caught on, and he's been incredibly lucky in the breadth and sheer amount of recording he was able to get in on. He's also a super talented guy who was easy to get along with, which is a great recipe. He's worked with many iconic country artists like Willie Nelson, George Jones, Emmy Lou Harris, George Strait, Alan Jackson, Jerry Douglas, Allison Krauss, Roy Parnell, who we had here on the show, Kenny Rogers, the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, Randy Travis, Brent Mason, who we had here, Steve Wariner, who was on the show, Reba, Trace Adkins, and again, McAnally we had here on the show, and many others. He also worked with a lot of rock and pop artists like Mark Knopfler, Bob Seger, Don Henley, Sheryl Crow, Mary Chapin Carpenter, Buddy Guy, Joan Baez, Aaron Neville, and others. And his career high watermark has been recording and touring with Mark Knopfler since 1993. He's played on every single solo Knopfler album, and Mark is one of Glenn's dearest friends, writers, artists, and favorite musicians. Glenn won a Grammy as co-producer for Miranda Lambert Country Album of the Year, and he's also received many Academy of Country Music Awards as bassist or co-producer of the year as well. On the personal side, Glenn and his wife are high school sweethearts. They have 4 kids and 5 grandchildren. Man, thank you so much. I so appreciate you coming on the show.
Glad to be aboard, man. Glad to be with you.
You originally started out playing guitar, but you said you had somewhat of an epiphany in San Antonio when you were 14. I was curious if you could talk about what happened and what were you doing in San Antonio at 14?
Well, it was in 1968, and they had this event called the Hemisphere, which was sort of like a scaled down version of the World's Fair, I guess.
Oh, yeah, man.
Understand it.
Yeah.
And my parents, God bless them, were very, very good about getting my brother and I out for all kinds of adventures when we were young. For whatever reason, they chose to take us down there that year. And I should give you the backstory a little bit in that I played a little bit of drums in the school band, marching band, that kind of stuff. And I did play just a tiny bit of guitar, but I was frightfully naive and ill-informed. And anyway, fast forward, they take us down there to San Antonio, and we're marching around in the middle of July or whenever it was. And I spot this sign for an outdoor concert. And I was very excited about that, asked my folks if we could go, and they said, sure. So my brother and I ran into the little outdoor pavilion and took seats right up on the front row. There wasn't anybody in the audience yet. We were well before showtime. Anyway, I made sure that I sat down right in front of the biggest amp on stage, not realizing that it turned out to be the bass amp. And I remember it was a Fender Dual Showman. I didn't know that at the time. I knew it was a Fender. It had these 2 big 15-inch JBLs glistening in the sun. I just looked at that. I thought, this is going to be fantastic. Anyway, the band came out, and it was sort of a poor man's Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass cover band. That was kind of what their main thing was. Anyway, they come out, start playing, and again, the guy that's plugged into this giant amp is a bass player. And I was so naive, I didn't even know what a bass was. I remember looking at it thinking, it's only got 4 strings.
Where is
he's only playing one note at a time. What's that? But the epiphany came in what it was doing to my stomach and my rib cage, because every time he played a note, it spanked my gut. And I just remember thinking, I don't know what this is, but I've got to do this. I've got to do that. And I will tell you the funny part of this story, and that literally was, it was in that moment that I thought, I'm going to find out what this instrument is, what kind of guitar that is, whatever, and that's what I want to do. And I did. When I got back home to Madison, I eventually bought my first bass, and that was the thing that kick-started that whole adventure. The funny bit of this story is that many years later, after I'd moved to Nashville, I was doing some sessions with some pals of mine. We were on a break in the studio, and I mentioned that story. And the drummer listened intently, and then when it was over, he said, wait a minute, tell me that again. And I told him the story again. And he said, San Antonio, 1968, Hemisphere, Poor Man's Herb Alpert, Tijuana Brass. I said, yeah. He said, that was me playing drums.
Holy.
He's one of my dearest friends. God rest his soul. He died a number of years ago, but a wonderful drummer named Tommy Wells. He was kind of one of the guys in this town for a long time. Anyway, small world.
Man, I got goosebumps. That's pretty.
Well, I know.
That's a nice story.
I said, I suspect you're then partly guilty for me becoming a bass player, because I'm sure part of the concussive sound I was hearing was actually his kick drum as well, you know. But anyway, it's one of those happy little stories. Yeah,
man. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry for your loss. That's a great story. So you knew right then and there, you were just moved to the level of, this is what I got to figure out how to do for my life.
Well, or at least moved to the degree that I really wanted to know anything I could find out about it. I was so naive at that point. My parents both played a bit of piano. My mom was a wonderful singer, although she only ever very occasionally would sing in church or something like that. But they both played the piano. There was always music on in the house in the form of their very limited record collection, and they had the radio on a lot. They took us to a lot of shows, that kind of thing. But it was not a musical household. So again, I was really, I didn't know anything about making a living in music. I didn't know that people could do that, or certainly how you would do that. But it did spark my interest. I had a very emotional connection with music, as I realize now, at a very, very early age. And there was something about it that literally resonated with me. Again, I didn't know a person could make a living at it, or how you would set about doing that. But at some point, the lines began to blur, and I did eventually realize this is what I want to do.
That's a really cool story. Your dad being in the service, was he supportive of, your passion about music and your desire to actually play for a living?
Well, to first of all, to be clear, he was only in the service for the first couple of years of my life. He was in the Air Force. And when he got out of that, we moved back to Western Kansas, where he's from originally. We spent several years out there. Then he wound up, circuitous route, but he wound up becoming a professor at the University of Wisconsin in Madison.
Oh, wow.
He's retired now, but he was a plant pathologist, studied plant diseases, and did a combination of teaching and then going out into research in the fields and working with farmers and golf courses and city communities that were, combating various plant diseases around the world. And my mother was a full-time school teacher at elementary school. And both of them, like I said, did not come from a musical background. Both of them came very much from a farm background. They were both raised on farms, and that's what they knew. Neither of them obviously chose to stay on the farm. But my point is that music was that came out of left field to them. That was something that, nice to have a hobby, great that you enjoy it. but not at all conceivable to them that somebody could or should try that for a vocation. That said, they were always very, very supportive of me. And I like to tell a story on my dad, and I don't know that he would swear that it's gospel truth, but for many years after I had moved down here and had my family and had been working full time in the studios for years, I think there was always a shadow in my dad's mind that this was really going to be sustainable. I think he still felt like it could all fall down at any one point. And then the first time I got called to play on the Monday Night Football theme, the old Hank Williams Sr.
Yeah, sure.
When that happened, he had something tangible to hold on to. All of a sudden, he's like, my boy it's him playing on Monday Night Football, you know. And I think from then on, he was like, okay, I think this is going to work out for me. But again, they were always very, very supportive. I can't begin to tell you how supportive they were and how grateful I am to them for that, even though they had no understanding of it. And to make it worse for them, my younger brother followed me down here a few years after I did, and he got into the business too. He was a wonderful drummer. He's long since gotten out of that and gone into he's a flight nurse on the Vanderbilt Air Rescue helicopter. He's been doing that for many, many years, but it must have killed my parents to lose both sons to this really bizarre way to make a living.
Yeah, but you and your dad, like everybody in your family did things they wanted. Like that's a pretty unusual path that your dad followed post-retirement of air. You know, he got into plants and he really got into it at a high level. And
yeah,
that's pretty cool that you all followed your passion.
Well, it is. And again, that's a credit, I think, to not only to my parents, certainly foremost to my parents, because they were those kind of people. They were very encouraging. They were very hands-on kind of parents, but at the same time, they knew when to let go and let us explore what we wanted to explore. And my brother had very different hobbies and interests than I did growing up, and they completely embraced whatever we wanted to try to do and let us go for it and encouraged us. And the other thing I will say, going right along with that, is being from a farm background, one of the things I learned, and my brother has learned from my parents, we both inherited a great, I think, work ethic. You know,
yeah, farming. Yeah,
had that. Both sets of grandparents had that. You know, if you're a lazy farmer, you are going to be in big trouble very, very soon. You know? And so that was instilled into both my brother and I, along with the freedom to explore what we wanted to, but the sort of the sense of responsibility that if you go into something, you better roll up your sleeves and go to work at it if you want to make anything out of it. I certainly owe that to my parents and grandparents.
That's cool, man. I think work ethic is probably the most important trait that someone had, because you could tell a lot about a person when they have a good work ethic. People with good work ethic are usually also honest. You know, they're reliable. If they say yes, it's yes. You know, there's a whole other slew of following traits that work ethic sort of drives, you know.
No question about it. And what you touched on that comes with that is really crucial, not just in the music business, but any business, I'm sure, is just the dependability.
Yeah, man.
If you say you're going to do something, then, I mean, if you committed to it, then you have to show up and deliver.
Yeah.
And you have to do it on a timely fashion. And if you don't do that, whatever your chosen occupation is, you know, I don't care if it's just playing touch football every Friday night. If you're late to the game, you've let your team down. And after a while, people are going to say, nice guy, talented, whatever, can't depend on him.
Not reliable. Yeah, man.
Our business is way too competitive to forgive any of that. So, right, you're right. With a work ethic, there has to be a good dependability factor that accompanies it.
Yeah, man, totally. Okay, so you have this experience in San Antonio. For the next 4 or 5 years, you start playing with a bunch of local bands. but you decided you needed some formal music instruction, which I give you a lot of credit for. Up until then, you were pretty much self-taught. So you snuck, I need you to explain this one. You snuck into the music program at University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire. How did that happen? And also, I guess you just answered it. My question was, what made you that determined to do whatever you needed to accomplish this? You know, that pursuit of excellence, which is work ethic, basically. But how did you sneak? Like, tell me this whole story, man. That's pretty.
Well,
funny.
I'll tell you that story. I should give you a bit of background what you touched on in my bio. I've always felt that I was incredibly fortunate to be living in Madison, Wisconsin at that point in my life, because there really was an incredibly robust music scene for what is a relatively small town. I think when I was growing up, there was about a town of about 150,000 people. But we had all kinds of local heroes there that were either in school or either at UW there in Madison or just living in the community. But we had Boz Scaggs was there.
Oh, wow.
Steve Miller was there. Ben Sidran.
Wow.
A lot of, there were some heavy guys. Clyde Stubblefield was one of the local icons that lived in Madison until he died, you know.
James Brown's drummer?
Yes, he was there.
Holy smokes.
Oh yeah. And it was a rich local community, incredible musicians, Curly Cook on guitar and oh gosh, I'm going to leave a lot of people out that I shouldn't, but you know, again, because of that huge university there and the state government there, and we're, you know, an hour and a half, 2 hours from Chicago, maybe a little more than that. But anyway, so in the middle of the week, we would have all these great blues guys coming up, Luther Allison from Milwaukee and Buddy Guy and Otis Rush and all those guys. And we would also have all kinds of great country artists. I remember seeing Merle Haggard and Conway Twitty and Loretta Lynn and, you know, on and on and on. They all played in the Madison area. So it was a great place for a kid to absorb live music. And by the time I graduated high school, I was playing with a number of guys that were really excellent musicians. Most of them were a year or two older than me, and I remember just thinking, this is great. This is what I want to do. I don't know how to make it work, but I want to be in a band, and I want to make this the way that I make my livelihood. But it was a very hard scrabble existence at that point. There were a lot of clubs all over the place. Live music was a huge industry at that point, even just on the local club scene. So I was working with guys my age or a couple years older, often much better musicians than I am. But again, I began to kind of bump into that thing I was talking about where I felt like, you know, some of the greater musicians that I worked with were also strung out a lot of the times, or drunk, or both, or just wouldn't show up, or, you know, would miss a gig, things like that. And after getting my heart broken several times by trying to get a band together and off the ground, I began to think maybe I need to think about just going solo in the sense of depending only upon myself. And I'm not a solo artist. That's never been an option for me. I don't have the right kind of voice or a good enough voice. I always wanted to be in a band. I thought, well, maybe the next best thing would be to become an accompanist, a sideman. And it was in that process of revelation, I guess, if you want to call it that, I began to see some of my own shortcomings, of which is about all I could offer people at that point was a willing hand and a whole bunch of shortcomings. And I realized I'd never had any real formal training. So I tried to get into the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and Richard Davis, the great jazz bassist, was the in residence there. And I didn't have a resume. I'd never taken any private lessons. I'd never studied, you know. they took one look at my so-called resume and said, no, thank you.
Were you playing only upright, or were you playing electric?
No, I'd never played upright at all at that point.
Okay, so you played electric. Okay, great.
But I thought, okay, maybe I can find my way into this music program. Well, they weren't built for a guy like me. I don't say that in any ugly fashion. That's just
sure.
That's not how they were structured. But at that point, the University of Wisconsin had merged with the state school system, which used to be two separate things. And they set up all these different satellite campuses around the state, and they would assign a handful of majors, specialty schools in each one of them. And I had been hearing about this music school in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. So literally about a week before the semester was to start, I sent in an application. I can't remember the process, but again, I had no kind of resume. But I think I got a call back or perhaps a letter, whatever, said, come up for an interview. So I went up to Eau Claire, not knowing a soul, not knowing anything about music in the form of how to get an education in it. And I had a meeting with the head of the music department, a wonderful man named Dr. Rupert Holman, who was a classical violinist, and he was the head of the music department. And I'll never forget, I sat down in his office. He looked at my quote unquote resume. All I had listed was played a little guitar, played a little bass. At that point, I was actually playing a little pedal steel guitar, which he didn't know what that was. Don't blame him. And he said, you've never studied with anybody. You've taken a few lessons here and there, but just little bits and pieces. You don't play an instrument that we teach here in our program. And he said, honestly, I can find nothing here to make me say that I should let you in our school. Oh. But he said, something tells me that I should take a chance on you. So he said, I'm going to take a chance on you. And he said, I'm going to put you on probation. He said, you will need to pick an instrument that you can study, or an area, voice or theory, something that you can study and apply yourself to, and I'll put you on probation. We'll take it a semester at a time. We'll see how you get on here. And I looked through the list of instruments and I thought, well, I remember they had string basses in the orchestra room at my high school, and I probably at one point walked up next to one, pulled on the E string a moment and said, no way. No interest in it, but I thought this is as close to anything that I'm going to get. So I said, I'll take the string bass. I'll take that up. And they had a wonderful teacher there that would drive over from the Twin Cities, a guy named James Clute. And he had launched a good many astonishing professional string bassists, both in the classical and jazz world. And
let me just interrupt you 1 second. I looked him up when I was, going through your stuff, mm-hmm. and man, there was so many like very warm and loving testimonials, or about how he had influenced all kinds of people throughout their lives. It was really nice.
A wonderful guy. And again, he launched several, probably many more people than I know. It was sort of their entryway into becoming a professional bassist. Scott Pingle, the principal bassist with the San Francisco orchestra. He's from my hometown too, actually much younger than me. I've never met Scott, but I'm a huge fan. And James was his first heavyweight teacher, and James got him trained to the degree that he felt like he could help, and then hooked him up with other teachers. And another guy named Craig Rifle was a longtime dear friend of mine. He's retired now, but he spent 40 years with the Detroit Symphony, and equally great jazz bassist. A lot of guys. And there were other people too. That was the magic thing about being in Eau Claire at that time. They had a jazz department that was headed by a guy named Dominic Spira, a great educator, great trumpet player, and a wonderful percussion teacher named Ron Keyser, who actually wound up becoming kind of a mentor to me as well. the thing that all these guys had in common, and even my professors that turned out to be from a world away from me that really couldn't understand what I was up to, all these people were so kind to me. And I guess they saw something, because almost every one of them reached out to me and said, come by my office later in the afternoon or before I go home, and let me sit down at the piano and show you a few things. Let me show you what it is we're talking about. They recognized that I could barely tell you where middle C was and didn't know how to read music, but God love them for it. They spotted something, and they bent and broke the rules to get me in there and to keep me in there once they got me in there. And I will forever be indebted to them. I only stayed there a little over 2 years. And then I decided I needed to go back out into the music community, find out what it was like to try to make a living full-time as a musician. And I also recognized I didn't want to teach, and I was not destined to be a symphonic player or professional jazz bassist. But the best thing that I learned in those little over 2 years, those people exposed me to so much, gave me some wonderful habits, and essentially taught me how to teach myself going forward. How they gave me enough information that I could keep going.
What do you think these people saw in you that they were willing to make the investment?
I don't think that they would have seen anything remarkable in me. I think they saw some talent, but not any inordinate amount. There were all kinds of kids in that school that were way more talented than me, and certainly light years ahead of me musically. And but I think they were genuine educators. I think they wanted to help people. I'm sure there were some people on that campus in the faculty that maybe weren't of that bent, but I don't remember any of them. I don't remember having anybody like that. Most everybody I had seemed very enthused, and if they picked up on the fact that a student was genuinely interested and willing to do the heavy lifting of practicing and studying, I think that was enough for them to give more of their time. And I'm hoping they saw some talent. I'm guessing they must have, but I'm hoping they saw a willingness on my part. And who knows, maybe they just felt sorry for me because I had I'm serious, because I had so little training. And some of these kids came to that school, they were pretty fully formed. That was just a touching pad. I remember there was a great legendary jazz pianist named Lyle Mays who went to school there briefly. And I remember, playing in a few little impromptu jazz ensembles with this guy and just thinking, where's this guy? He spent, 15, 20 years with Pat Metheny in that group, the guy was from another galaxy, and those guys were not uncommon on that campus. I think, again, my professors saw me as a green kid, but
they must have sensed the drive, though, man.
I think they did.
Yeah, you don't invest time, because it's easy when I'm sure you've done the same thing, mentoring other guys when they first come in through Nashville. When you see someone that's like, even if they're misguided, but they're hungry and they're willing to do the work, those are the people you want to help.
Well, that's true. And one of the things about trying to get better is that you have to be willing to fail.
Yeah.
You got to be willing to land squarely on your backside, quite possibly in front of people that you're trying to impress. That's part of the process, I think, of getting better. And that's part of what I learned in that school, And again, I suspect that they recognized that I was willing to do that, because I was pretty much almost from the beginning there. When I got into the school and got myself a little apartment and eventually a house that I shared with other music majors. I was out 3 to 4 to sometimes 5 nights a week playing in local bar bands, rock and roll bands, country bands, jazz groups, theater gigs, whatever I could get my hands on. And I'd come dragging into I always had an 8 o'clock class, and always. And I know my professors could see that I was getting a little tattered, but I think they liked the fact that this kid he's so hungry for this that he's out there playing clubs at night, and yet 8 o'clock in the morning, he's sitting there.
Yeah, man.
Ready to get some information from me. And I think that made them feel like that what they were doing was appreciated.
Yeah.
I got to call a quick timeout and tell you something here before I forget. Man. It's one of those little feel-good stories, feel good to me anyway, but I'm going to back up to my teacher, James Clute. And I did not keep up with James after I left school. And I must have broken his heart every time that he came in, because it was light years behind every other student he had. He knew I was a complete day one beginner with him. And again, I'm sure I must have tried every bit of that good man's patience. Anyway, a number of years ago, I was on tour with Mark Knopfler. I was in Boston we were based out of Boston for a week. And I was staying in a hotel not far from Berklee School of Music. There was a string bass shop there at the time. And I walked down there one day, found this beautiful bass. I went down there and played it every single day. It just killed me. It was so great. And it was getting near the end of the tour. I thought, well, I really would like to buy this thing, but I've got to go home. When the tour's over, I'll sit down with my wife, because it was a lot of money. And I'll talk it over with her, So a few days after we finish in the Boston area, tour ends, I get home, I talk it over with my wife, and she very astutely said, "This is not a hobby. If you feel you need to do it, go for it." So I called the shop, and they said, "Glenn, I can't believe it. We sold it yesterday." Okay, so that's, I'm making a long story out of it. I don't mean to, but that set me off on a jag. I started looking for others made by this maker. And the maker was a man named Prescott. And he's kind of known as the sort of the grandfather of string bass builders. Anyway, I found a string bass up for sale by a private individual up in Iowa. And I drove up, tried it out, bought it immediately, brought it back to town. And when I got it back to Nashville, I got looking inside. There was a repair sticker inside the bass dated 1979. And it said, restoration done by Sam Colstein and Son, New York. Well, I know Barry Colstein, who is Sam Colstein's son. I called him up and said, "Barry, I bought this bass and a Prescott bass, and it's got this sticker in it from your dad's shop, and you probably had your hands on this thing. Would you mind going through your dad's records? Tell me who the previous owner was at that time." He said, "No problem." A couple days later, I get an email from him, and he says, "Yes, in fact, Glenn, that bass did come through. Congratulations. It is, in fact, Prescott bass, probably dated about 1825, 1830, something like that."
Wow.
He said at the time of restoration, it belonged to a gentleman named James Clute.
Wow.
This is that bass.
Holy, how cool is it? You must have felt
it was my teacher's bass. And if you
talk
look
about destiny, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'll tell you this. I ran into Edgar Meyer not too long after that, maybe 6 months later. And Edgar and I have known each other a long time. I can't call him a close friend, but he's never slapped me anytime he's seen me, so I guess we're doing But anyway, I told him that story. And Edgar is a very mathematical guy in every sense of the word. Beautiful guy, but very, very mathematically inclined, very practical. And he's listening to me, and he's nodding his head. And I finished the story, and I'm expecting him to kind of react like you did. And he says, "Well, in all likelihood, what happened is that when you were studying with James, the sound of his instrument left an imprint on you. And then when you heard that same sound all these years later, you responded to it, and that's why you bought it. And I'm thinking, that's probably right, but that's not what I want to believe.
That's not what you want to hear, man. You want to hear
this mystical connection or whatever, you know.
Right. The universe lined this up, and it was meant to be. You lost that bass, and then you went on a jazz. You know, it's funny though. You know, I think I had Richard Bennett on the show recently. Now he told me a similar story, and now maybe it was in Spain where he found some guitar, and he said, man, it was like, I think maybe an old D'Angelico, or maybe it was in New York. It was in New York. It was an old D'Angelico, really old. And he said, I need to go home and talk to my wife. And he said, you guys were relentless. You all swarmed on him like flies on poop. Like, no, man, you've got to get this. You've got to get this. It was so funny. But how your story happened, it turned out to be good that everybody didn't get on you to get the bass then, because look what happened.
Well, and the funny thing is, I think that I've often wondered about the bass that I missed there in Boston, but this is the one that came my way.
Yeah.
And I was a lead conspirator in that effort to get Richard Bennett to buy that instrument. And I told him, I said, you know, my wife told me that this is not a hobby, and your wife will tell you that too. And,
right.
And I told him, I said, you know, this old Abraham Prescott calls to me in the middle of the night sometimes, and I will get up out of bed and come out here and play it.
That's really cool.
You should have an instrument. You're one of the greatest musicians I've ever known, and you should have an instrument that wakes you up in the middle of the night, calls you like a siren on the shore, and says, come spend some time with me. And I said, this instrument clearly does that for you. It did, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I still probably have horns showing, but I was a proud co-conspirator when he finally threw down for that thing. And he told me, and has told me many times since, he said, you were so right. That's the instrument that does speak to me like no other.
Well, when I asked him, what's your favorite guitar? That's what he said. I'm pretty sure that's what he said was this number one. He said, there's nothing like it. So, you know, you all did him a good service.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you quit, you mentioned you quit school after 2.5 years. You moved to Nashville. How'd you get work once you got down here?
Well, there's a little, well, one little at the time. There was a several year chapter in between the two, between my leaving Eau Claire and winding up in Nashville. And I played in a bunch of no-name lounge bands, traveling all across the U.S. You know, made a living at it, but I remember, again, I had glimpses of things to come, and they weren't all good visions, if you will. I would be, you know, sharing a room with whatever musician in whatever band I was with, and I would sneak out of the room to sit outside or someplace and try to do a little practicing, or if we were sitting down at a club somewhere, go back over to the club and try to practice, you know, while all my pals were sleeping in. And I remember thinking, you know, one of these days I'm going to wake up, I'm going to be 40 years old and waiting for the maid to come clean my room. And there's nothing, doing anything that's leading to anything better. It really disturbed me. But that led me to make up my mind that I needed to pick a music center and go somewhere and just dig in and see if I could make something happen. And I won't bore you with the various choices or the deliberations I went through, but I looked very seriously at LA. In fact, that's where I was intending to go. I never really considered New York. It was just too far away. I didn't know anybody up there. I didn't know that lifestyle. It was so frightfully expensive, obviously.
Yeah.
And I looked at Chicago and New Orleans and Minneapolis and Atlanta and other cities, but Nashville's the one that made the most sense. And I always loved country music. And I thought, you know, I know how to play this stuff. And that sounds cheeky to say that, but I'd played a lot of it. And I knew, you know, I had a pretty good idea of some of the subtleties involved that a lot of guys would blow right past. So I thought, all right, Nashville makes sense. And I moved here. And again, I didn't really know hardly anybody. There was one guy that, a brilliant keyboard player that lived here at the time named Alan Steinberger. He was crucial in talking me into coming to this town. He said, forget LA. He said, you need to be here. He said, in a few years' time, half of LA will be in Nashville. They'll be living there. Go ahead and move to Nashville. You get established. And I came here really wanting, at that point, kind of more interested in being a steel guitarist, but I met a lot of bass players in the short visits that I had here. And one thing I realized was that there was a sense of community here that I wasn't likely to find in LA. Some of these other bass players said, hey, you know, there's no such thing as enough work, but if you wind up here sometime, give me your number. And if I got something extra I can't get to it, I'll try to help you out. And I thought, I won't find that probably in New York or LA.
I've interviewed people all over the world. Nothing is like Nashville for that.
No.
Nothing. I have never, you know, whether it's guitar, bass, anything, people are so like, hey man, I can't make it. You want to get this gig?
Right.
And it often leads to something else, a permanent, you know, I mean, so that was really fortuitous, really good.
It was. But that said, I didn't hold any high hopes. I don't think unrealistic hopes, but I had a little bit of money saved and I moved down here. And ironically, my buddy that pretty much single-handedly talked me into moving here, Alan Steinberger, within 6 months or whatever of my arrival, he packed up and moved to LA and had a brilliant career out there. So go figure.
Yeah.
But anyway, I won't kid anybody. Those first few years were grim. They were really, really tough. And my wife and I got married about a year after I'd moved down here. She got pregnant almost immediately. We hadn't planned on that, but that's what happened. And I was way behind the 8 ball. We had big time medical bills and I had no job, all that kind of stuff. But eventually I caught on doing some road work and did that for several years. And but I always knew that, you know, I have made the move down here to try to get into the record business, and I need to do whatever I can do to make a stab at that. And if it doesn't work, then we'll go back home. We'll go back to Wisconsin. I'll go to work in the local music store, or the hi-fi shop, or something. I didn't know what, but I just said, I gotta see this through. I gotta go for it. And so I eventually quit the road, at least in the sense of any kind of full-time work, and committed to just trying to do studio work. And I recognized fairly early on that I was not probably ever going to catch on with the iconic session team of that era, because those guys had been here at least a generation before I came in.
Yeah, you mean like the Reggie Young kind of guys?
Reggie, but I'm thinking about the guys that even predate him, the bassists in that era were Bob Moore, just the King Kong daddy of them all in this town, in my book, Henry Strelecki, Joe Zinkin. There were a lot of great bass players and a lot of younger guys than me that had already been here for a while that were doing a fair bit of the studio work. And my point is, I recognized, I thought, you know, these guys are so established. They have their relationships, they have their loyalties, they have producers and artists they've worked for many years. They're not going to call me. They're not going to. Why would they call me when they've got all these guys that they've been friends with for so long that are so good at what they do? And ironically, within right about that time that I tried to quit the road, I kind of got gut punched because Willie Weeks moved here, Joe Osborne moved here, David Hungate moved here, and a wonderful bassist, buddy of mine named Larry Paxton moved here, all right about the same time. And they all had terrific track records. They were my heroes, you know.
Yeah.
Not only were they amazing bass players, they were already marquee players. They had very successful careers in LA or wherever they had lived prior to that. And so the moment they moved to town, bang, all of a sudden I've got a whole nother echelon of players that are here doing the work, along with the guys, like I say, that were sort of the original Nashville icons. And I left out so many guys. Norbert Putnam was another great bass player that was here at the time. And Mike Leach. I mean, these are King Kong daddies, you know.
Yeah.
So one of the things, and maybe the most important thing, again, that I recognized was that I'm going to have to find my own way in. I'm not going to work for the great producers of that era, at least not starting out. And what I started doing is I would just go out and we call it networking now, but back then it was just going to writers' nights. And thankfully there were a lot of those in this town at that point. And I would hear some songwriter whose songs I liked, and I would approach him or her at the end of the evening and say, hey, I really liked your song. And, you know, I'm here in town and I'm looking for something to do. If you ever need a bass player, if you want to do a showcase or you have a live gig or you know, a publishing demo or whatever, if I can never help you out. Well, those people were approachable because they were starving like I was. And as those people began to infiltrate the system, get a record deal, get a publishing deal as a songwriter, or some of them became publishers themselves and or producers, they called me. We all started out sort of together, and we all had nothing. We all came from nothing, but we all kind of rose up as a crop would. And a lot of those guys I have worked with ever since then. And as they got successful, I got successful, and vice versa. So that was a slow and often very, very painful process. And I will say, I don't really know what it's like now. It's a very different town.
Yeah.
The record business is entirely different than it was when I moved here. And to make matters worse, LA, New York, Detroit, Philly, Austin, Chicago, you know, on and on, Atlanta, all those great record centers that were maybe not, you know, quite as big as LA and New York or even Nashville, but those all had very viable recording scenes. And by and by, most of those have disintegrated, and the players have had to empty out of those towns, and they've come here.
Yeah.
It's a very, very, I can't even imagine how competitive it is now for young players.
Or where you even start, or how you even start.
I don't know. And to be honest with you, you asked or mentioned that maybe I've sometimes mentored people. I haven't really done a lot of that. And the main reason that I have not mentored very many people is that I don't know what I would do for them. I do occasionally get inquiries from people. Can you help me out? Can I take you out to lunch? Can I buy you coffee? I'm struggling. I'm trying to figure out how to get something going here. And I'm, like I said earlier, I'm 66 years old. I've worked now with 3 different generations of artists, and occasionally with what would be the beginnings of a 4th generation, but I'm not well connected now with the youngest producers and power brokers and even players and artists. So I don't know how to help anybody. I can't introduce people to people that I don't know, you know. So I have not done a lot of mentoring. I try to be brutally honest with anybody that wants advice, but I can't, there's not a lot more steering that I can offer than that, you know.
You know, there's 3 things that you did that really, I certainly didn't have the wherewithal at that age to do them. And the one is to realize that I needed to get some lessons. The second one was, I don't want to be 40 years old when the maid's coming in this hotel. I need to do something. And then when you got to Nashville, approaching these songwriters and saying, hey, if I can help you, let me know. I like what you're doing. Where the hell did that come from, man? Those are those are very good intuitive things that I mean, to make those, to come across those thoughts as a young person like that, that's really impressive.
Well, I don't feel like I can take a lot of credit. I mean, a lot of it is just plain and simple good fortune, and maybe combined, like I said, with a good work ethic and some good instincts along the way. One of the things that I've been very fortunate is I've always loved working with singers. And the thing I love perhaps the most within that category are singer-songwriters. I've always been a song guy, and I pay a lot of attention to the lyrics as much as I do the melody, you know. And I used to do some songwriting on my own, maybe that's why. But I'll tell you this, when I was a young pup, very young, and we were living out in western Kansas, and I remember my grandfather's place, his farm was about 50 miles from Dodge City, Kansas. And we had gone up to Dodge City one day, and we were headed back. He lived outside a town called Garden City, Kansas. And we were headed back there. I must have been about 5 or 6. And I remember sitting in the back seat of my parents' car, and the radio was on. They had a speaker in the back. And there was a big, black, evil-looking thunderstorm blowing up, as it only can out there on the prairie.
Yeah.
Just evil-looking thing. And I'll never forget Frankie Lane. I didn't know who he was at the time, but he came on singing "Ghost Riders in the Sky." Now, anybody doesn't know that song, this won't make any difference to you, but it was terrifying.
What a song.
And I remember turning around and gripping the back of that seat cushion, the back seat, looking out the back window at this massive thundercloud bearing down on us, and hearing him singing about the ghost herd in the sky and the ghost riders. And I swore I could see him singing that, and I could look through that rear window and see the faces of those guys. And I remember being terrified, but also remember thinking, why is this song affecting me so much? I've never forgotten that. And that is a really crucial thing to me. It's that connection to the song itself and that emotional connection. I think that was one of the luckiest things that ever happened to me, is that I somehow or another developed this love, an intense affection for songs themselves. And you know, many of the artists that I have the most fun recording with are tremendous writers. You know, Bob Seger.
Look at Knopfler. They don't get come any better than him, man. That guy's king songwriter, let alone even get to his guitar playing.
And funny, when I first got here, one of the communities that welcomed me most readily was the jazz community. And I would go out and play in lots of little quartets and quintets, septets here in Nashville. And, you know, didn't make any money. I mean, no money. Literally $5, $6, $7.
That hasn't changed.
Yeah. But they were the only community that would welcome me. And they did. And I pretty quickly fell in with a bunch of those guys. And some of them are still friends of mine, thankfully, to this day. But my revelation in doing that was I didn't move here to be a jazz player. If I was going to be a jazz player, I should go to New York, because that's where they are, or possibly Los Angeles. But I also recognized, as much as I love playing with these guys, nothing moves me like the human voice. The instrumentalists that most move me are the ones that sound most like the human voice. And that's my connection. Again, the song, the human voice, that's what makes me want to pick up a bass and get in there with them. And I've been lucky because that put me in touch via a very, very long circuitous route. That put me in touch with the people that I still work with and still revere today. And that's been the biggest bulk of my career have been, commercial musician to be sure, but working with really gifted artists that are great writers, or if not that, at least great interpreters of great songs.
Yeah, man, I think you just made
a real lucky break for me to have that love of it.
I also think you have some intuition there that you got from somewhere that allowed you to make some pretty good decisions in difficult situations. So,
Yeah, I was listening the other day to an interview on public radio, and it was with Terry Gross, and she was interviewing the women's soccer star. Is it Megan Rapinoe? I can't remember. I think it's Megan is her first name. But anyway, it was a brilliant interview, and something she said really hit me. She said, I had to find my own way. She said, obviously she's become a star in that world, but she said, I'm not the fastest athlete out there. I don't have the best skills. To be sure, I am a good athlete, but I had to find how to make my game out of what cards I was dealt, what talents I was given. And she said, I'm not the fastest, I'm not the strongest, I don't have the best footwork, whatever. And I'm sitting listening to that and thinking, yeah, I can relate,
Yeah.
I don't have music store chops. I'm not a virtuoso player. And we could take that into a whole nother thread that I spent a lot of time thinking about. But one of the things I recognized is that there was a place for me, if I kept my ego out of the way and could truly accompany somebody, I had some kind of a gift for that. And I can't explain why, but I've been around myself long enough to know that was sort of my gift. I wasn't the flashiest player. I didn't have the biggest toolkit. I didn't have that many quivers. That many arrows in my quiver, But I could work with a singer and figure out what he or she was trying to say and try to play the right note at the right time for them without ever trying to turn the spotlight towards me. Let the light be on them, but make them sound better. And that I think is the thing I'm most fortunate musically to have had.
That's the definition of a great side person.
Yeah.
The definition of a great side person. It's what it's all about.
Yeah, and I'm to this day, I'm just blown away by. There's so many astonishing bass players on this planet, and most of them do things I could never in a million years do. And I'm not in any way, shape, or form putting myself up there with them as far as what they can do. But we each have our own gifts, and if you're lucky, you figure out what you can do and how to develop it. And again, if you're really lucky, you make a living at it.
Tell me the top knee-jerk reaction, top 3 sessions you've done and why.
Oh,
I know, tough question.
That's a good one. Well, I will tell you one that is so impactful to me. When I had my quote unquote session career up and running, I was working pretty much every day, but I was doing a lot of music that, to be very honest, I did not like. It was not very good music. There's plenty of it. I was making a living, paying our mortgage, paying for the grocery bills for our 4 kids and all that, but I wasn't feeding my soul. So I started, again, I went back to the songwriter community, and I started playing with a number of different writer pals of mine, and all of whom, as it turned out, wound up getting record deals. And I would play in their band when we do live shows locally, little showcases or gigs, whatever the nature would be, play on their demos. And when they got record deals, once again, they pulled me right along with them. One of the most crucial ones for me turned out to be my dear friend, Kevin Welch, who is from Oklahoma originally, lived here a long time, and he lives down outside of Austin, Texas now. Kevin is a brilliant songwriter. He got signed to Warner Brothers back in the day, and he was adamant that he wanted to use his band to back him up in the studio, which was a little uncommon in those days, quite uncommon.
Oh yeah, because the producer has these are my session guys.
Yeah, and with great reason, you know, because their name is on the line. They're responsible for bringing in a record that the label will approve, and they only have X amount of money and time to do it. And
sure.
Why would I roll the dice on a complete unknown? But thankfully, the producer was a guy named Paul Worley, who's a great musician himself, and just a fantastic guitarist and a brilliant producer. And he came out and heard us, and he did a couple sides, kind of test sides with it. Another producer pal of mine used another rhythm section. He cut a couple sides on Kevin Welch. Anyway, long story short, Paul Worley, the label said, "We like what you're up to. Go make the record." So he brought Kevin's band in. We did this record. And that record came out, and I don't know what it ever sold. Maybe 10,000 copies, maybe half that, maybe twice that, but not a lot of records. But it was a songwriter's record, and the band was so, for that era, so fresh, so unlike anything else. And that little record wound up on so many turntables within the songwriter community. And that opened so many doors.
Oh, yeah.
That one record. And I got a cold call out of the blue one day from Bob Seger.
Holy crap.
This would have been about 91, 92. It wasn't from Bob himself, it was from his producer. He said, "Hey, Bob wants you to come to the studio and overdub some bass on a new record. Would you be willing to do that?" So, are you kidding? Yes.
Twist my arm, yeah.
So go over there. Come to find out, after spending a couple of days there with Bob, he had that Kevin Welch album. And not only did he have it, he knew every note I had played on it.
Wow.
And he'd let me have free rope. I'd go out there and just play whatever I thought was appropriate on his song. And sometimes he'd really like it, sometimes not so much. But more than once he'd say, "Hey, Glenn, you did this one note right here on this particular song with Kevin Welch." And I'm like, "My God, this guy knows that? He knows this record that well." And when he would illustrate that, I'd say, "Oh yeah, okay, now I see what it is. I understand what you want me to do."
That's crazy, man.
Went so many places and opened so many doors. And part of it too, I must say, some of it had to do with one of the basses I owned at that time, still own it. It was a very, very early Steinberger. And we suspect it might be the first fretless Steinberger that Ned ever made, because very early serial number, I can't remember what it was, but in the 2 or 3 digits anyway. And the position markers were off. They weren't in the right place. So I had to kind of ignore where the dots were on the side of the neck to play in tune.
That's hard.
And I always prided myself when I play fretless. I very rarely gave away the fact that it wasn't fretless. I didn't do a lot of sliding. I let the bass just growl, and it had a sound that almost sounded like a synth. That bass also got me a lot of work. from that record and other sessions that I was using that bass on. So that record and that bass opened a lot of doors because it was a sound that people in this community had not heard. So I got to throw a lot of light there on my buddy Kevin Welch. And I will tell you another, I don't know if this fits into your question, but I did a chunk of a record years ago with Patti Griffin down in Austin. And I had just gotten in from the airport and flew in. I don't remember, I might have brought one of my electrics, but they provided everything else, and including a string bass that was in pretty rough shape. And she wanted to do this song, just Patti and myself, vocal and string bass. And it's a bass I don't know. It's an old K or Epiphone or something like that. And it had a horrendous rattle in the top, something very unfriendly sounding. And she said, I want to cut this song. I just want it to be just you and I. And I'm thinking, okay.
Now, in a situation like that, can you tell her, hey, this bass sucks, without saying it like that, this bass sucks?
No, I just thought, they rented it. This is my dance partner.
Right.
So I just got to make something happen with it. And the only way I could do it, Patti we did it in a house that she rented. And she was in, I'll say, the parlor, and I was, say, in the old dining room or library or something in this little house, not in the same room with her. But the only way I could get the bass to not rattle when I played it was to essentially lay down. I didn't lay all the way down on my back, but I grabbed an old lawn chair or something that was laying around, and I found that if I laid most of the way down, not completely horizontal, but laid, I think it was my right leg over the top of the bass and pulled the mic, I could play a note and the bass wouldn't rattle. And all of a sudden I realized, I think she asked me to count it off, if I remember right, and I counted it off just thinking we're going to run it through. And all of a sudden I realized, no, there's no running it through with Patti. She gives it all away every time she sings. And I thought, she's going for it, And I remember that so vividly, just thinking, God help me, how am I going to, it wasn't a complicated song per se, but
laying down with your leg over the bass ain't really normal.
Trying not to screw anything up and thinking this is probably going to be the record, however this turns out. And it was. And they wound up adding a drummer later on. I can't remember. They might have added a bit of piano to it. But anyway, I'll never forget that. And the reason being that, again, recognizing she was going for it. She didn't know about my miseries. She didn't want to know.
Right.
That was my job to deal with that stuff. She's a pure artist, and she's giving it away, like I say, on this vocal performance. And I had to, man up and uphold my end of the bargain.
Sure.
And I never forgot that. It was great for that,
Wow.
And then I guess if I'm going to say a third session, I know I'm going to leave a lot of really great ones out, and I don't mean to do that, but because of the overall arc of what it has meant in my career, I would say working with Mark Knopfler, and once again, he heard me with Kevin Welch.
Get out of here.
Bluebird Cafe, and this would have been about 1992, I suppose, something like that, and. We're playing at the Bluebird Cafe. It's a packed house, which is not hard to do. It's a tiny little place.
Right.
And we finished the first set, and I'm walking to the men's room, and I see this hand stuck out from the row of bar stools up at the bar. And the hand is attached to Mark Knopfler. And he said, cool. Man, great playing, mate. I love what you're doing. Really great, and I was tongue-tied. I mean, it was so unexpected to see him. And I just, I told him what a fan I was of his and made small talk for a minute. And then I just said, I'm not going to burn a hole in this man's evening. I just left him be, thanked him, and went on my way. And then a few months later, I got a call from his producer saying, hey, Mark would like you to come play on a song. Would you be interested? Absolutely.
Man, do you have a Kevin Welch wing in your house?
I should.
You should have a wing named after him, man. Oh my God. That is crazy.
Well, and once again, I mean, the thing of it is, he had no commercial success. He did, as the years went by. I think he got a Chris Stapleton cut last year that's probably going to pay some bills for quite some time, I would hope. He's had some commercial success here and there with his songs being picked up by other artists, but he's one of these guys that's kind of, unfortunately, a little under the radar, but he's a great songwriter, and he moves people when they hear his music. And that's what appealed to me way back when. That's why I threw in with him all those years ago. And, it was lucky. I mean, part of it was good instinct on my part, just to recognize I like this guy's music. He's the real deal. But anyway, there are a lot of seeds that floated off into the musical atmosphere and took purchase someplace because of that album and other albums that I did. I'm sure that I know I'm leaving out, but that, in those days, I would guess it's still this way now, but in those days, your calling card was what had you played on and who was hearing it. And there were guys that were going around town very, very heavily promoting themselves, which I was never inclined to do. And I always thought, that's my calling card. I had business cards printed up like everybody did in those days. But, if somebody heard something and it turned their head around a little bit, and they're like, wow, what's that? That was probably going to lead to more work. And I very much owe Kevin for that. And everybody else that was kind enough to drag me in the studio with them and take a chance,
How did you get the gig with working with Buddy Guy? And is there any lessons or funny stories that you can? Well,
I owe that entirely to a friend of mine, a great producer / songwriter named Tom Hamworth, who is his Buddy's producer and has been for a long time. He's a wonderful guy. He's a great songwriter, great drummer. And he's I don't really know his history with Buddy. I don't know how many albums he's done, but he's done a number of them and was kind enough to let me play on a few tracks here and there. And I will say, I had a particularly nice moment on the last record we did, which would be probably close to a year ago now, I'm guessing. Or was it, this is going to sound dumb, but might have been 2 years ago. But I think it was.
And the way things are now with this empty space in our life.
Yeah, no kidding.
How the hell what is your frame of reference to recall
it's just prairie in every dimension.
Totally. Absolutely.
Anyway, it was about a year ago when we were tracking the stuff that I was involved in. And again, I had done a little bit of work with Buddy and he's a lovely, lovely man and just such a soul daddy. And I think he had been around me enough by that point that he was relaxed and we had a lot of great chats on the couple days we were together. Anyway, the last song we did, and I couldn't tell you the title, I don't know it, and I don't have the record, so I can't even go back and find it at this point. But anyway, we did a track together, and Buddy was sitting on a stool, as he usually does when he's playing guitar. And I remember I was doing something on the bass that was slightly left of center, but I looked over at Buddy to see if this was registering, number one, number two, if he liked it or not. And he was smiling at me and nodding his head. Anyway, we got into the song and that, as it turned out to be the take, and that was the last song that I was involved in. So I put my bass down afterwards and I walked over to him while he was still sitting there. I said, Buddy, I said, we're all just trying to walk in your footsteps. That's all we're trying to do. And he put his guitar down and he pointed his finger at me and said, not you, baby. He said, you got your own footsteps. And I thought,
whoa, that's pretty cool.
Thank you. You know, one of the
that's a moment.
Yeah. So, I hope the fates allow to get to work with him again, because there just are no people like that left on this planet. You know, somebody that worked with and was a part of all that great music.
Yeah.
From Chicago back in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. You know, still going, for that matter. He's still bringing it. He can still play. I've
seen him like probably 4 or 5 times, and he's a different buddy guy it's a different dude who shows up every day, every time there. Like, you know, just a different personality. Or
he is, but man, he's a champion for a lot of people. He's one of the guys. I don't claim to know the history. I wound up doing a day of tracks a few months ago with this, in my view, brilliant young guitarist Kingfish. Kingfish.
Oh yeah, Chris Stone or something like that.
Yeah, he is. Bad tone. Man, he's great.
He really is.
They all say he's an old soul. He's an ancient soul in a young man's body. And Buddy recognized that, and I think Buddy had a big deal in saying we got to help this kid out. You know?
That's cool.
That kind of person. It's not all about him. It's about spreading it around, helping other people. You know.
That's cool, man.
Yeah.
How about Willie Nelson? How'd you wind up connecting with Willie, and any funny stories about Willie?
Well, I don't have a deep connection with Willie. I've worked on a number of albums with him through the years, some of which he was not even there for, or they'd hire a stunt singer and then go get his vocal on it later. I don't know that I have any, I don't have any profound stories from working with him, and it's not like we're close friends or anything, but I will say I have great reverence for the man, and part of it is that he is a guy who has lived his life so that he could make the music that he wanted to make.
Yeah.
And he's an icon. He's internationally famous, but he never set out to be what people wanted him to be. He set out to be what he wanted to be, in the hope that people would like it. And man, did they ever. It took them a long time to catch up to him, but they did. And I think that's maybe, I would say, as an observer, and certainly to a very limited degree as a participant in some of the TV shows I've done with him and some of the records that I played on with him. He's his own man.
Yeah.
Always has been. And never tried to chase a trend. He is a trend in and of himself. He just has always been his own man, as best I can tell. And I think maybe that's one of the best lessons you can take away from him, whether you know him or not, that there's an awful lot to be said for having a vision of what it is you want to do and sticking to it. And he is that guy. He's done that, you know.
Is there any other artist that comes to mind where you want to talk about the session? There's a special feeling, or it was fun, or it was nutty, or it's anything that comes to mind?
Well, I've been so lucky. There's so many great artists, and I mean, anybody I name, I'm going to leave 20 more out that should be named as well. But well, I'll say this. I did a record back in September with Alan Jackson, and a lot of people maybe don't know who he is anymore, unfortunately, but he's a great
songwriter
and artist. And I was fortunate enough to play on the vast majority of his records, but I'd missed the last one or two, and he's not on the radio much anymore, I don't suppose. And I think it had been quite some time since he made a record. So anyway, long story short, they wanted to get as much of the original recording band back together to do this new record, which they did. There were a few folks that were not able to join, but most of the original guys were there. So that in itself was like a family reunion.
That's cool.
And Alan's a very quiet guy, probably you could say shy, a man of few words, no matter what. And the first thing he did when we had everybody out in the room with the headphones on, he got on the mic and said, guys, he said, it's great to see you guys again. Been too long. It's really great to have everybody back. And he said, thank you for being here. And he said, you know, I'm not trying to get anything on the radio. I just want to make some damn good music. And I want it to be heartfelt. I want it to be real. That's why you're here. Let's have fun. And you could say that about, in my view, any of the great artists. And I've been lucky, you know, working with Emmy Lou Harris through the years, and George Strait, who is one of my favorite song interpreters in the world, and George Jones and Merle Haggard. I mean, these people were as good in their craft as Frank Sinatra was in his.
Sure.
Or Billie Holiday was in hers. I mean, these people know what they're doing, and they can access something in their emotional toolkit, if you will, that most singers cannot, you know. So again, I picked that particular story about Alan, but you could say it about any of those people. There are those people that recognize that they are doing something from their heart. They're giving you a piece of who they are when they either pick up the pen and put it to paper, or when they step in front of a microphone. They're giving a piece of themselves away. And that fires me up more than anything else in the world to get to accompany somebody in that moment.
You know, and from my personal experience, once you do that, there's no going back.
No.
Yeah, man. Once you decide I'm going to do this because it makes me happy, it's like cocaine, man. I mean, that's it. Yeah. You're in a good way, though. It's like, I can't do anything for any other reason.
Yeah.
And I learned that from this show, to be honest with you, and from talking with all of you guys, the inspiration that you all have had, and it's changed me in a dramatic way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very different thing now. I want to believe that it's not gone forever, but it's gone into something that's not quite what that was.
Yeah.
I've been brought in for, you know, individual tracks here or there with some of the young artists, and I was not pleasantly surprised when they didn't even come over to say hello. Or say thank you or anything.
And you know,
I don't know what kind of world they operate in. You know, everybody now is so layered up. If they have any success, they're layered up with multiple managers and promo people and handlers and you know, I don't expect a kid to do his or her homework and necessarily know who anybody is that's working for them, but the real pros back in the day did, you know.
Well, man, it takes nothing to walk over to somebody and say, hello, thank you, I appreciate you.
Yeah, or even if they weren't going to sing, even if they just happened to show up at the studio and you're there overdubbing, you know, in my view, we play music for the human connection.
Yeah, totally.
Not everybody plays music for that reason, but I do.
Yeah.
And so if there is no human connection in the music that we're trying to make, then that is music that I would just soon not be involved in.
Sure.
That's back to what you were talking about. Again, being lucky enough to play with so many people who did give you everything they had when they sang or when they wrote or both. You know, what a marvelous thing to be able to try to contribute a little piece to that. Try to be a co-collaborator for a moment, you know, even if in a relatively insignificant way.
Glenn, is there any, if you had to go back and give young Glenn advice assuming that you would have listened? Anything you would have told yourself to do that would have made your life easier? Business, personal, music, anything?
Well, I don't think about that as much as I used to. I used to mourn the fact that I felt that I squandered a number of years playing in those no-name bands. It'd be easy to look back on that and say you're wasting your time. And there were a lot of mistakes I made once I came here because I wasn't hip enough, wasn't savvy enough to know better, to know a better way to get involved in more meaningful work. But I've let go of that. I don't beat myself up over those mistakes because, number one, I've been incredibly fortunate. I mean, beyond measure. I've just been so lucky, and I recognize that. And so, when I was a kid playing in a club in some non-existent town in Nebraska or whatever, and wondering how in the world I was ever going to connect that dot to the dot that I live in now, I can't beat myself up for that, and I don't. If I could reach back to that kid and say anything, it would probably be along the lines, I might have improved things if I had gotten to that place earlier where I let go of worrying about the commerce, worrying about making money, and just really tried to find people who were doing it for heartfelt reasons. And maybe if I could tell the young version of me to make those alliances earlier in your life, maybe that would have panned out even greater than it did. I don't know. I don't lose a lot of sleep worrying about it because it is what it is.
Yeah.
And as I said, I've been incredibly lucky. But again, it took me a long time to figure out that my instincts are worth listening to me.
For you, yeah, of course.
And to maybe, if I could have listened to those instincts at an earlier age, maybe that would have been better than the route that I took. That's one of the things Knopfler always says. He always says, everybody's got a little voice inside, and you've got to listen to that little voice. You've got to listen to it. Of course, that's what part of what makes him so great is he was listening to his little voice from a very early age. But even then, he had a lot of detours before he finally committed to what ultimately launched him, So, yeah, maybe I would give myself that advice, and I'd probably be too boneheaded to understand it.
That was a great answer, man. I really appreciate that. That is really yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, I not to overshare, but my wife and I have endured some health challenges on her part, major league ones. Our life is very different in the last 7 years than it used to be, and we've had a hell of a learning curve that we are still trying to be graceful in learning our way around it. But a great novelist pal of mine wrote me a beautiful email after my wife had her stroke 7 years ago. And he said, look, man, he said, you may feel that you're at the end of your career. Maybe you are at the end of your career. Maybe this is going to take away your ability to continue your professional life. But he said, you are not at the end of your natural life. And as cliche as it is, he just said, just look around and look for the beauty around you, because it's there every day. And that kind of crystallized something that was beginning to bubble in my own mind, but his words really helped crystallize it. And I would say that to anybody. I would say it to myself at 16 years of age, at 14 years of age in San Antonio, at whatever stage. I would say that's as important as it gets. Just try to find the beauty that's right there in any given moment. And if we're lucky enough as musicians, we can find a bit of beauty and share it with somebody else, then that's what we ought to be doing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, when you look for that, your whole, like, I had someone on the show recently and they said something like, look, if I want to have a good day, I can have a good day. It's just how I'm looking at things.
Yeah.
And that is so powerful. And when you can do that, and as you said, find the beauty, it really takes a lot of stress away.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have found
you know, I'll use this to say something that I would like to say, and it's just it's a theory that I have. I did a bass webinar a while ago that Victor Wooten and Steve Bailey put together with some other bass player pals of mine, and I threw it out there then. I've thought about it quite a bit before I said it, and a whole lot about it since then. And what I threw out there in that, I'll throw out again, which is that my own theory is that there are sort of two parallel lines of how to make music. And one of them I think of as being mathematical. By that, I mean, you need to have a working knowledge of how to make music. That does not mean you have to be formally trained, but it does mean that you have to train yourself to whatever your instrument is, to put your finger in the right place at the right time to play what you think is the right note. And if that involves endless years of study, learning learning very dense harmony, like in the form of jazz or classical music, then that's the mathematical side. You got to understand how these harmonies work. And if you're an accompanist, you need to understand what your function in that is, whether you are playing in a string bass section in the Cleveland Orchestra, or you're the bluegrass bass player down at the Station Inn in Nashville on a Tuesday night. You need to know how the music itself works, and you need to know your place in it, what you need to be able to contribute to that. So that's the mathematical side. And I have spent a great deal of my life studying harmony, practicing things, skills that I don't necessarily use much anymore. I don't hardly ever have to sight read, but I spent a lot of time learning how to do that. Training my ear, literally ear training, and that still goes on. All those things, not so much sight reading, because I just don't get called to do those dates anymore. But that side, the mathematical side, I still keep my hand literally in that and my head in that. But the other side is at least as important, or in my view, more important. And that's what I think of as the mystical side. And that's the side that you cannot get from a classroom or a video online. You get it from playing something and watching somebody else react to it, or actually before that, playing something and reacting to it yourself. Why does this note make me feel this way? And this one that is also part of the same chord doesn't make me feel anything. I don't know if this is making sense.
No, it's totally making sense, man.
This is where I'm at with my musical life now, and I have been actually for many, many years and didn't know it, but trying to balance between the mathematical side of understanding on an intellectual level, a certain scale, a certain time signature, a certain rhythmic figure, trying to make friends with that stuff, trying to understand it. That's the acquisition, if you will, of the skill set that is more mathematical in nature. Then the other side is the side, why, when you play something, does it evoke a feeling, either hopefully to begin with in yourself, and then hopefully in whoever the listener is. And I have learned that that really matters. And that's one of my favorite things about playing with Mark Knopfler all these years. I can converse with him on the intellectual side, the historical side of music. I can talk about the notes in any given scale. I can argue with him that this perhaps would be a better bass note this time around on this verse than it would have been on the first verse. And he can have that argument and completely back it up with me from his perspective, because he is that kind of musician. But at the same time, we both recognize, all right, so we do it this time and we don't do it on the next verse or whatever. Why is there an emotional payoff? We both can recognize it. It's probably the musical foundation of our musical friendship, is the fact that we both recognize these things when they happen. We hear the value, the beauty in it, but we couldn't tell you necessarily why that happens. But then when we take it out in front of an audience and play it, and I look out there and I see tears running down the cheeks of grown men who maybe don't even speak English as their native tongue, probably don't in a lot of instances. That's the mystical side.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm throwing this out into the community, as it were, is that I've known so many musicians that fell pretty hard on one line or the other. I've known so many brilliant musicians that operate pretty much all within the mathematical side. They will not they won't blow it. They'll play the right note. They know their scales. They know their key signatures. They know how to play time. They know what the appropriate note choices are as a bassist within any given chord. But they don't move me. And they don't move anybody. They get hired living. I've known a lot of those people.
Yeah.
And I sit there and go, man, you got such technique, you got such horsepower, you got such knowledge, but you never break my heart.
And that's really in the guitar community, I think even more so, because so many people are wrapped up, especially now, like with YouTube and about the shredding. And I never listened to that stuff. Nothing. I mean, I admire the talent. I could never do that, but
yeah.
What's the emotional? I mean, I'm listening to music to have an emotional payoff, not to, to marvel at how fast me personally, and
yeah.
So I totally get that, man.
Yeah. It's probably been 10 or 12 years ago now. A buddy of mine took a group of us players from here in town up to his high school alma mater. It was a private school that he went to back east, and they had a very well-funded music program in that school. And we were up there for the weekend doing this on-campus seminar with these kids. And he got me up early one morning and said, Worf, you got to come with me. I'm going to go to a composition class, and I want somebody there with me. So I went, and there were 5 or 6 students, and they were all, bless their hearts, are all nervous as can be, because they had all gone into their computer lab and had done some compositions, and we were there to listen to their compositions. So we did. Each student submitted one piece of music. There were no lyrics, there were no vocals. It was all instrumental stuff. And some of the stuff was quite intriguing to me. Some of the sounds were really interesting. There were places that I thought, ooh, that's kind of a neat little moment there. But again, to be fair, they were high school students. I don't know anything about their their educational training to that point. But we listened to everything. And one of the things that I asked them after we listened, I said, you guys, what do you think about when you are composing? Are you thinking just about the sound? And obviously you've got the whole galaxy of sound at your fingertips now in the form of MIDI files and computers. So there any conceivable sound or marriage of sounds is available to you guys. I said, what's going through your head? Are you just totally searching for sounds, or are you trying to express an emotion, or both? And not one kid in that room, none of them were thinking about trying to express an emotion.
You're kidding me.
I'm not kidding. And that was really shocking to me.
Yeah, that's
But again,
weird.
They're young kids, and there is literally a world available to them. As you mentioned, everything's online now. When you and I were kids, I remember I'd go hear somebody in a club or a live gig of some sort, and the bass player or the pedal steel player, whoever I was focusing on, might do something that just kill me. I go, oh man, I got to remember that. I got to remember that. I got to remember that. Have I got it? Have I got it? Yeah, okay, I think I got it. Well, I didn't have any way to record it, and I couldn't revisit it on YouTube.
Right.
So I would go home and pick up my bass or sit down behind my steel guitar and say, I think that's what he was doing. I think that's what she was up to, whatever. Of course, the beauty of that, I didn't recognize at the time, was that it was automatically mine.
Yeah.
Because it went through my filters of trying to perceive what he or she was up to. And then the time it took to get back home and try to remember it, which I'm sure I didn't remember correctly. And then it would automatically become a little bit of my interpretation. Well, the world doesn't operate that way now. I mean, it's all available online. And it's not a fear. It is a concern that I have. But I think of those kids in that high school setting I was talking about, I hope one or two of them at least found out later on that, oh, this stuff should make me feel something and should make somebody else feel something. It's not just about the mathematical side. It's not just about the knowledge. It's about the emotion that music should, in my view,
I agree,
convey.
I think, not to sound like an old man, but this is the cause for.
You're talking to an old man. It's okay.
But this is because my kids are 30, 28, and 20. And I don't know how they relate to other kids their age, but my oldest two, the 30 and 28-year-old, they're very emotional with me. They communicate, they can share feelings. All the things that I'd want in a relationship with a child. My daughter is not as forthcoming. And she grew up where 5 girls would come here and they're all on their phones, none of them talking to each other in the room. And that blows and I think that's responsible for some of that, because the connections that you can't get emotions out of this, in my opinion. I mean, you can tell somebody I love you or what, but by and large, people text because they don't want to be bothered.
Right.
It's like fast and easy. I don't have to share anything. You get the message or not. And it's
right.
I like connecting.
Yeah. Yeah. We're in the connection business. I mean,
right. I call people and I'm like, hey, I know you probably were looking for me to text you, but I'm kind of old school. Can we just get I want to gauge somebody before, do I want to work with them? Do I want to do business? I can't get a text and make a decision. I can't, and I think that's some of, again, I know I'm sounding old or we're sounding old, but I think that's responsible for a lot of this.
Well, it is. And obviously in the midst of this pandemic, the wheels have come off, all bets are off. We've had to
totally,
in every way possible, we've had to rethink things, and we're not done with that, any part of it yet. I feel like, there's a fear, and I'm heading into it myself. I told you before we started the interview, I had a Pro Tools rig here at home, and I did a handful of overdubs for pals of mine, songwriter pals of mine, and then I got busy, probably back out touring and whatnot, and let it go, and just, I still have the rig, but it's desperately out of date. So I'm in the process of updating, and I will probably be back online at some point in some form or another. I don't do social media at this point. Maybe I will as a means of connecting to the recording community, as it were. But I've never aspired to be one of these guys that does his work from home. I've always loved playing with other musicians. Now, at this point, I recognize there's good music to be made, and perhaps the way that we, for any number of reasons, not the least of which would be the pandemic, we need to make it remotely. Yeah. And if that's the case, then maybe I'm willing to explore that and see if there's something I can offer to whatever the musical community is in this day and age. And maybe there's something meaningful I can still be part of that way. I'm still doing live sessions here in town, not near as many, and everybody's being very cautious, and, wearing masks and being socially distant, all that kind of stuff. If they're not, I don't begin to take part in them. But my hope is that maybe I can make good music in both idioms, in a home studio, and still hopefully live again someday, and hopefully certainly in a regular recording studio with other human beings. My concern for the generation that doesn't know anything about life before the internet is that while there are endless opportunities to get your music heard, or to hear other people's music, or share knowledge, share ideas, that's all good. There's still nothing in the world like being in a room with another human being, or two or three or nine or 100, whatever ensemble you might be a part of, and making music together.
Oh, yeah.
And you mentioned my dear pal Nir Z that kind of hooked you and I up. He's one of the most gifted musicians I've ever known, and he's one of the most passionate musicians I've ever known. And every time I play with him, something completely unexpected comes out for both of us. And we almost never talk about it. We just sit down and play, and he'll throw something out, a little idea, that because that's what he is, and I'll throw something out because that's what I am. And we grab hold of each other musically and go someplace that neither of us would have gone to
on your own.
When his studio and me in mine. It happens when we're together. And so again, I'm not saying that great music can't be made one person in front of a keyboard. There's genius music that has been made that way. I'm just saying it's not the only way. And I hope we get back to the opportunities to make music with other people. And I also hope when the pandemic comes to an end, as I trust it will, that young musicians will find a way to do that. And I know a lot of them are, particularly seems that there's a healthy, vibrant acoustic music scene, the young bands that are playing great music together, and they recognize they have to do that together. That doesn't work one man at a time. It has to be done together in the moment. And it's not unique to acoustic music, it's universal. But I do hope that there will become an awareness that music, in my view anyway, should make a person feel something.
Oh, God, yeah. And,
maybe something you don't like, and maybe the next person does. That's immaterial, but if it's technically correct, but doesn't have a teardrop in it, then
we need the mystical, as you said.
Yeah.
Glenn, tell me your. That was really good. Thank you, man. That was good that you shared that. Tell me your top 3 Desert Island discs, just for this minute. Just for this minute, because of course that could change in 10 minutes.
For this minute, well, I will tell you one that will always be there. The band called Orleans back in the day.
I remember them.
I was lucky enough to get to play with those guys for a short while. It was kind of an ill-fated chapter of theirs, but their bass player, Lance Hoppen, is an old pal of mine and one of my bass heroes. He's just one of the most marvelous bass players I've ever heard. And most people don't know of him, but he's as funky as can be. And he always comes up with great bass parts and always picks notes that you would not expect to hear. Just a marvel. But anyway, they made a record back in the day. I think the album was called Wakin' and Dreamin', and it's just an absolute jewel.
Wakin' and Dreamin'?
Wakin' and Dreamin'. I think that's what it was called. And great vocals, great songs, great grooves. That would definitely, I haven't listened to it in several years, but I would take that with me in a heartbeat.
All right. What about number 2 and number 3?
Yeah. And another one might be, and again, I'm going to leave a million out. Joni Mitchell did a record a number of years ago in London with a symphony orchestra. And I believe the name of the album was Both Sides Now. But I could be wrong about that. But anyway, it's in my view, a really special album. It's some of her songs, but also she cut some standards. And the great Chuck Berghofer was playing bass on it, and the bass sound and the bass playing is just glorious. But I can picture the man that was the conductor and arranger, and I cannot think of his name, got a mental block, but genius at both. And anyway, it's a marvelous record.
Both Sides Now.
It sounds, every song sounds like her heart is just absolutely breaking. And I don't know if it was or not, but to me, again, just a very, very evocative record and very different from, obviously she's been a very eclectic artist, but as best I know, this was sort of a one of. I've never heard her do anything else like that. And it's one I get out at least a couple times a year and go back and revisit. So that would certainly be in the top 3. And then, I don't know, after that, God, I mean, I'd have to have some Sly and the Family Stone on a record, on an album. Got to. Some James Brown, But, I mean, after that, anybody's guess. There's, I'd be happy with some great old Sons of the Pioneers records or any number of great things out there.
Very cool. It's a tough question. What do you like most about yourself?
Wow. Yeah.
I know that's always a tough one.
You ever thought about being a police detective?
You know what I have, man? As I've gotten older, I've thought about a lot of things I might have enjoyed. And that is one of them, actually.
Yeah, you got I mean, that'd be a hard twist from where you're at, but you ask some really great questions.
Oh man, thank you. That's real
insightful.
Kind.
Gosh, I don't know.
You're a good friend, honey.
No, my wife is telling me I'm a good friend.
You're a good friend. Well, that's part 2 of the question. What would your spouse or partner say that they like most about you?
That's what she just.
You're a good friend.
That I'm a good friend. I would say one of the things that I've been gifted with, and I'm glad of it. I don't take any claim or any credit for it. It just seems to be something that I was given. I can hear both sides of a story. And maybe part of that is being brought up in my early years in an agricultural setting, small town, rural America, and then later on being exposed to the biggest cities in the world and recognizing that, as I say, folks is folks.
Folks is folks, man. That's it. That's interesting that you could hear. So you're good with not letting everybody air their, you could see both points.
I try to. I mean, I certainly have my own knee-jerk reactions, and I can be quick to anger, and I'm not afraid to let somebody have it if I disagree with them, on some kind of a moral issue, so to speak.
Sure.
There are a lot of things that are out there in our society right now that I have not enjoyed hearing in the last few years.
Nutty world.
Yeah. But again, when I get right down to it, I have my own political leanings. For what it's worth, they tend to lean left, but I have a lot of family members and dear friends that lean right, some of them way over to the right. And it's tempting sometimes to me to just write people off that I don't agree with. But I think that's the wrong thing to do. So I try to put myself in somebody else's footsteps, like Buddy Guy said, and just and recognize that we each have our own life experiences, and those form to a great degree, along with our DNA and whatever else, they form who we are. And somebody else may have a very different life experience than I do, and he or she, I might completely disagree with them, but they might not be wrong, And
that's the
first. And I'm not wrong at the same time. There's always two sides to almost any story.
That's the first answer. That's the first time someone's given that answer. It's interesting.
Well, my wife mentioned a minute ago that
you're a good friend.
Be a good friend. I look at my own collection of friendships that I've been lucky enough to have in my lifetime, and they're all over the place. Some of them, one of them used to be an auctioneer. Another one, used to be a fighter pilot. I mean, again, we all have our different life experiences, and I've often marveled at why I can't take any two of my friends and bring them together and form a friendship between them.
Yeah, man,
Sometimes
it's like
they just repel each other. It's like, and I'm looking at both. See the beauty in each other. I see the beauty in both of you. Why can you not see it, the two of you, in each other? Again, I don't know where that comes from. Maybe from my upbringing. Maybe it's partly DNA. I don't know, but I feel like I got lucky. And I try to be cognizant of that and try to be more forgiving and more tolerant. And recognize that I got plenty of faults myself, and people could throw me out without a second glance.
Sure.
Just as easily as I could anybody else,
It's funny. I don't know if this ever happened to you over the course of your marriage, where your wife says, "Oh, we're going out with my friend and her husband," and it's like, man, relationships are not transferable.
No.
Just because you like her does not mean I'm going to like him, and I'm probably not going to like him, and he's probably not going to like me. But I'll go along with this because
Yeah. I've seen it too many times where I tried to, professionally tried to hook people up, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it works professionally but not personally.
Yeah.
They can function well together in a professional circumstance, but they don't have any blood in common.
There's no vibe.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah,
and you can't create that either.
No, you cannot create that. Yeah.
Tell me something or someone you miss from your childhood.
Well, gosh, I mean, there'd be an endless list. My mother passed away, and of course, last year, and
I'm sorry, man.
Miss her. Well, thank you. She was 88 years old, so she had a great life, and no regrets there. I miss my dad's dad, my grandfather. He was a West Kansas farmer all of his life, and adult life anyway. And I spent so many days with him.
That's the one with the big thunderstorm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was very close to him. He was like a second dad to me. And he was just the most laid back guy, very, very intelligent, but in a very non-threatening way, just maybe I got some of that, ability to see the good in people from him, because he could do that. He could always find something good in somebody,
That makes your life a lot easier, man.
He gave me a lot of great life advice that I didn't realize I was getting at the time. And I've always missed him, always will, and my memories of that part of my life are among the things I treasure the most,
Thanks for sharing that, man. Do you have any non-musical superpowers?
I don't even have any musical superpowers. This may sound weird.
That's a weird question.
It's a good question. It's a good question. I do not have any superpowers. I've got and I don't know where it comes from, but I've got a pretty, I will say, what I think is an above average sense of direction.
That's true, honey.
And my wife is saying, that's true, honey.
I heard.
But I've been around a lot of the globe, and sometimes in a town only once. And I used to jog a lot, so I used to see things very up and close. I can't do that anymore, and I haven't run in many, many years. But I have this ability I have some spatial sense of how things connect within a city. And if I've been someplace once, I tend to remember it, although I'm not aware of it until I see it again, or until I'm somewhere in the general proximity of it. And that has saved me so many times, whether it be in Paris or London or rural Oklahoma. I could find my way around because I'd say, all right, I know where the sun is. If it's nighttime, and I can see the stars, I know which way is north. But I also have this ability to sense where I am and how to get back to the hotel or something, or how to get from here to someplace else. And now we've got GPS. It's not really
not that impressive anymore.
Yeah, but there's so many times where in the middle of the night, driving along a highway, middle of nowhere, and come across a road closed sign unexpectedly, and I think, all right, well, I got to go right or left. I'll go right, and then I'll make another left, and I'll make another left at some point, and have some internal compass that more often than not will lead me back to where I was trying to go in the first place. If that makes sense. And again, I can't take any credit for it. It's not something I've ever worked at.
Yeah, that's just one of those intuitive things. Yeah.
The only other thing that I might have, I remember reading an interview many years ago with the actor Harrison Ford, and he's evidently was a pretty darn good carpenter. And he made the comment, he said, I've got perfect plumb. And I thought, what in the world was that? And did a little reading on it. It's like some people have perfect pitch.
Yeah.
I do not. I have good relative pitch, but not perfect pitch. But he said, I can look at anything, and I can tell you if it's plumb, if it's straight up and down. And I got a pretty good eye for that, but it doesn't do a lot of good. Maybe when I'm trying to straighten up my wife's pictures on the wall or something. The occasional carpentry project I may take on around the house in the way of home repairs, maybe it comes in handy there. But for me, not a real usable skill, but it does seem to be there.
Well, this thing, spatial sense is heightened. That's the first time someone's answered that as well. You got a bunch of firsts today, man. You have any hobbies outside of music?
I do. I don't do them as much now. I'm pretty much, if I'm not working, I'm most of the time taking care of my wife. And
Sure.
Unfortunately, we do have a couple of wonderful gals that are caregivers that I can hire that allow me to get out and even tour if that comes about, or even just go out for a morning of work and all that. Point being that I don't drift off into my hobbies as much recently because I'm involved in caretaking my wife.
Sure.
But I've always been a bit of a history buff. I love reading. I love reading, period. And a lot of it seems to be historical in nature, although certainly not all of it. So that's a big one. And I've always enjoyed little minor woodworking projects. And I have flirted from time to time with, being one of these guys that late in life gets into furniture making or something like that. But the hard reality is I've decided not to do that. Number one, because I don't think the world needs another crap carpenter, which is probably all I would be. And because it's not I have too many carpenter pals that are missing digits.
Oh, yeah.
Have a broken finger that they never really did any more than stick back on and lost the use of. And I think, there's still music I want to play. That's probably not a great first choice for me.
Yeah, as a bass player.
So, I've got a garage with quite a few hand tools in it, but I stay away from the big power machinery and all that for the most part.
Smart, man. Hey, two more questions, Glenn, and I can't thank you enough for your time and your sincerity.
Sure. My pleasure.
Most important lesson life's taught you?
Again, a fantastic question.
Thank you.
The lesson that I think I have learned, and I hope I have taught my kids, is there's absolutely no reason to have a conventional life, unless that's what you aspire to. And, somewhere along the way, a lot of miniature decisions were made on my part to become a musician and become the musician that I've ultimately have wound up being. I could have done better. I would like to have done better, and I'm still working on getting better. Always will, I hope. But, a lot of my buddies looked at me when I was in high school and I was making the noise about wanting to do that. And they were headed into, ultimately studying law or medicine or something else, real estate, whatever, managing a restaurant, whatever they chose to do. Some of them went on, I think a handful went on to brilliant lives within those professions. But I've run into so many of those guys in the handful of class reunions I went to, and most of them came up to me and said, "Man, you did it. I so envy you. You've got this big, profound life." And of course, they only see it from.
Yeah, they see that you're on stage. They don't. People
don't know about the drudgery and the heartbreak and the boredom and anguish and everything else that any of us has to go through. But I recognize, I guess that's so. In that, I've largely lived the life that I wanted to live. I mean, I've got to do what I wanted to do for a music. For a living. I got to play music for a living. I still adore it. When it's great music, there's nothing better to me in the world in terms of what I aspire to do. I have an incredible wife. I have incredible children, and now wonderful grandchildren. And I'm grateful for those things. I can't take hardly any credit for any of that. I just got lucky, and that's what I was given. So again, back to what I used to try to tell my kids is just, I don't want you to be a musician. I don't want you to be a lawyer or a fireman. I don't want you to be anything but what you want to be. But whatever you want to be, I want you to be good at it and have a joyful life. And even if that means you take on a career or a job that you don't necessarily find that much joy in, a lot of people do that, but they have joyful lives outside of their work, and their work allows them to have those joyful lives. And if that's what works for them, go for it, you know.
That is such a great thing to tell your kids, man.
Well,
it really, it's like you can't get more supportive than that.
Yeah, and I guess that I could give back to my parents, because they did not stand in my way when I told them I wanted to be a musician. They didn't understand it. They were very concerned about me, and they did tell me, well, you know, maybe it'd be a good idea to go ahead and go to school and get a degree in something else, so you got something to fall back on. And I went for none of that, but they still gave me their blessings, and I'm sure said their prayers and hoped for the best. And I got lucky. I just got lucky, you know? Yeah.
Well, you make your own luck too sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with that. Knopfler always says, what does he say? It's a great point. He says, and I've never heard anybody else say it. He said, everybody gets a shot. And I thought for a minute, I thought, really? He said, no, I mean, he said, everybody, in my view, he said, everybody gets a shot. Question is whether you are ready for it when your opportunity comes.
Yeah.
Wow, I'd never thought about that before, but I think he's right.
I think so.
Yeah. Anyway.
And last question. Biggest change in your personality over the last 10 years, and how much of that change has been intentional and how much is just a natural part of aging?
Well, as I said before, I'm 66. I didn't freak out when I turned 30. I didn't freak out when I turned 40. I didn't freak out when I turned 60. But somewhere between when I turned 50 and when I turned 60, I began to hear the clock ticking. It's there.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, because I think there are a lot of people in this world. I mean, let's face it. I mean, there are millions and millions of people who, through no fault of the fact that they were born in a certain place at a certain time, have extremely difficult lives. All they can do in a day's time is hope to find some clean water and something to eat.
I say that all the time. Just the simple fact that born in this country in this time period, what a miracle that is. And what things we're afforded, as opposed to being born in Somalia or someplace like that, you know?
Right. And we have to recognize, I mean, millions and millions and millions of people caught in that horrible predicament. And I'm grateful for the fact that I'm not one of them. And I'm also, you know, I try to be cognizant of the fact that, okay, I'm crowding 67 years of age, and how many years left do I have, period? How many years left do I have to play music? How many years left do I have to be a husband, to be a father, a grandfather, a son? My dad's 90 years old, and I talk to him every other day. How much longer am I going to get to do that? I'm very lucky to have this awareness of how lucky I am.
Yes, definitely, man.
Having that awareness of your own good fortune, and at the same time, having an awareness of the fact that we're only here for a very limited time, and to try to make it count if we're, again, among the fortunate ones that don't have to just get up in the morning and go seek shelter or water or food or whatever, you know. I'm grateful for that awareness that comes with this age that I have become, you know, and again, trying to see the beauty in things that are right there in front of me that when I was younger, I would not have recognized. I wouldn't have seen it. I would have looked right past it, or not heard it, or smelled it, or tasted it, whatever the case may be.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Let me tell people, I wish I had stuff to promote for you, but I don't have a lot. So I want to tell people.
Well, that's my fault. I appreciate you trying to help. And like I say, I may
and Glenn
find
money.
my way to social media at some point. It may happen.
If you're looking at hiring Glenn for some tracks, you know, the best thing to do would be to shoot him an email at Glenn, Glenn Worf, WORF at mac.com. All I would ask is that you send him a link to something that you're looking for, you know, what made you call him or whatever, you know, why do you think you guys are a good fit, whatever, just talk to the guy. And so he can get a feel for what's going on, what you're looking for, and he could respond normally and appropriately to you. And you can reach him again at Glenn Worf, GLENNWORF at mac.com. He's a real badass. We didn't really talk much about his playing, but this guy has had a tremendous career. Everybody on that Knopfler gig is like,
oh,
it's like the greatest. It's like the all-star team, man.
Well, they are by far the greatest group of players I've ever played with.
That's awesome.
I mean, any one of them just ridiculously great, and I've always have felt that you know, if I had to pick one thing that was without a doubt the best thing that happened to me in my professional life, it would be joining Mark all those years ago. And
that's awesome.
It is like going to the All-Star game. It really is. That's
phenomenal. I hope to God you guys start touring, and I hope you come down here, man, because I would love to see you guys. I mean,
yeah, it's I
can't imagine the show.
It's interesting, to say the least, because once again, he's the only artist I know that he will go out on any given evening on stage and not play all his hits. I don't know any other artist that has the courage to do that, but
yeah,
there's a couple big chestnuts that he has more or less let go of, because he's like, I recognize that my fans want to hear that, but we've also created all this other music in the years since that people also have grown very attached to. And
yeah, he won't play Sultans of Swing, isn't that it?
And he won't play Sultans of Swing. Well, actually, we did. We put that back in the set this last year. We went without playing Sultans of Swing, one of his biggest hits. And you got to admire somebody.
Yeah.
You may not agree, but you got to admire somebody who has that kind of artistic courage to say, I'm over here now. I'm not over there anymore.
But man, he's got so many great songs. Like, it'd be impossible not to be satisfied. I mean, if you don't hear the Sultans of Swing or what, you know, or Money for Nothing, there's so many greats. And the guy just as a player is just a beast. I mean, that's a rare, Gilmore's like that, but he's totally different style player, you know. But I was thinking about him when you were talking about the guy that always picks the right notes, but it is heartfelt, man.
Yeah.
There's a, Knopfler, Gilmore, there's a handful of these guys, but they're,
very, very few, very precious few.
Very much, man. Yeah. Hey, listen, I have tons of questions that I would have loved to ask you, but I don't want to take up all your time. Thank you for everything, man. You're such a nice guy. Everybody.
My pleasure. Thank you for all the great, insightful questions and for doing what you do. Richard Bennett had raved to me when I talked to him last. He raved about the time he spent Zooming with you, and
cool.
near Z, like I say, he's the guy that first told me about you, and he said, I think you should check this guy out. He said, I hope it's okay. I gave him your name and phone number, and he said, but I think, you know, this is a guy that you should consider doing an interview with. I thought, well, if you approved, if you approved, then I probably should pay attention to this. And he was
thanks. That's very complimentary. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm working on taking compliments. I'm better at it. And now I just say thank you. And I don't say that. Don't say
you deserve them. And I'll tell you, the only one that I've listened to of yours was one that you did. I have no idea when you did it, but it was with Neil Jason.
Oh, and, bass player.
And I love that. I mean, I'm a big Neil Jason fan, always have been, but that was great. So I'll be checking you out.
I did that about a year ago. Yeah, it was right. It was like a few months before COVID came. It was a few months before COVID came. So it's close.
I enjoyed that. So I'll be checking you out.
There you go, man. I've had so many. It was funny, man. Like I had to work my way up from white belt to black belt with guitars. But once I got in, and I just got automatically put out to all the black belt bass players and drummers. I didn't have to start over. And I've been really fortunate. I've had just some lovely guests, and you know, I think the universe is, you know, telling me I'm supposed to be doing this. So, and I'm happy doing it. So it's working.
Good on you, man.
Thank you, Glenn. Hey, hang on one second. We'll wrap up. Let me just say goodbye. And thanks for everything, man. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, please share it on your social media channels. We appreciate your support. Thank you very much to Glenn Worf. Again, if you want to check out Glenn, if you're interested in talking with him about hiring him to play on your music, on your record, or do some tracks, it's Glenn Worf, GLENNWORF @mac.com. And most important, especially nowadays, man, remember that happiness is a choice. So choose wisely. Be nice, go play your guitar or your bass, and have fun. Till next time, peace and love, everybody. I am out. Brother, thank you so much.
Adios.